Hello, Denise. I'm here too.
Did you get there first?
Maybe. I don't know. I can't see you now, though. You're black. The screen is black. There you are.
Oh,
Oh,
here
oh,
I am. I was hoping
are
I
we
was hoping
live?
by the third go at this we might have it right, Nicole.
Oh, we might need one more turn, especially if we start having our cocktails for coaching
Yeah,
and cocktails.
cheers. Cheers, girl.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Friday afternoon.
Absolutely. So, I think one of the things that it was suggested that we do in this 24-hour Lean Global Connection was insert every now and again a coaching session. And so I think both of us wondered how many people might turn up for a coaching session in Asia Pacific in the afternoon when we're trying to get to the end of Friday. And so we thought we better have a backup plan in case no one came. Oh, we've got Kwa here, so that's good. I can
Yes,
see
right.
he's in the chat. So we're really inviting people to, tell us who's here. It's be really great to know who we're talking with, because, those of you who know Nicole and I know that we can just have a 30-minute conversation pretty
Yes,
easily
Dylan,
on our own.
Brian.
So we had a bit of a backup plan with a bit of content, just in case there weren't too many coaching questions coming. So, but I will open my screen of the Q&A just in case. And then Nicole, if you want to actually open the chat, and then we've got both bases
Yep.
covered. Does
I've
that
got
sound
the
all right?
chat. I've got the chat open.
Cool. All right.
Dylan says cheers. I hope that's because he's got a drink, although I imagine he's still at work. Graham from Papua New Guinea. Nigel's here from the UK.
Oh,
So
someone from the UK still up,
that's
or is it
right. Can't
time to
sleep.
get up again?
Can't sleep. So this works better, this coaching and cocktails, if you pop a coaching question in the chat. Otherwise, you just have to listen to Denise and I pick what we think is important to talk about.
So as I said, we do have a backup plan. And Nicole, do you want to share your screen?
I will. I've just had a bit of a problem with a delay. So let's see how we go. It can fix that up. There. Fantastic. Go back up here. Go back up here. Okay. Can you see all the notes as well, Denise? Don't have to change the
No,
setting.
we're good. We're good.
We're good. Fantastic.
I'm going to start by having a bit of a look at that image. My colleague Nicole, who I've worked really closely with over the last couple of years, challenged me at the beginning of the year to get with the program and start to use some AI to help us with the work. So we went to a course, and I scratched my head for a few weeks, and then she made me commit to using AI at least once a day to do something. So here's my today's version. We've got our lean mascot with a cocktail. I've got my gin. And what have you got there, Nicole?
I've got iced tea parading as cognac.
Well, at least that starts with
I have a meeting to do after this coaching and cocktails. I thought it best not to turn up having had cognac.
My gin's non-alcoholic, so I will confess that.
Mm.
And if anyone else has got a cocktail out there, let us know. So one of the things, someone's got coffee. Yeah, that starts with
Yeah,
C2.
that'll work. That'll work.
One of the things that Nicole and I talked about when we were prepping for this session was, maybe we could have a conversation about how we explain lean thinking. And I think what has been really helpful for me is when John Shook encouraged us all to add practice to the end, because I think that's, made it a lot easier. Although it's a lot longer to say lean thinking and practice. I think when we think about lean thinking and practice and adding that practice, it's really helpful in terms of defining it. And I was doing a little bit of reflection, and it's sometimes a bit scary to think about how long we've been doing this for. And I was thinking about 20 years ago, doing training, and having a sort of habit at the beginning of asking people what they think lean thinking means. These are usually people who are fairly new to lean thinking and practice. And I think 20 years down the track, I feel like we're still getting a lot of the same answers. So efficiency, streamline, removing waste, improving processes, improving flow, efficiency again, optimize. I don't know, any words you would add to that, Nicole, that you think come out fairly commonly?
Cheaper,
Yeah, cheaper.
less people.
Uh-huh.
So this, the kind of consequence of efficiency, people kind of think it's about taking stuff out rather than putting things in. We would think about it as putting in value, but I think a lot of people think it's about taking stuff out.
Yeah, and I think, we maybe go to the waste before we go to the value sometimes. And I was listening into the leadership session, Nicole, you and Tony did earlier with the three CEOs, and I thought it was I thought their definitions of what lean meant to them were wonderful, but particularly David Plunkett, when he started with the customer, and how important that is. So I suppose if we think about it from how John Shook would always say, if the learner hasn't learnt, the teacher hasn't taught. And so, what are some of the things that we've been trying over the last, few years in terms of introducing people to the concepts of lean thinking and practice? I definitely don't think it can be covered by one slide.
No.
But I think we now have a sort of a series of slides that are helpful and that hopefully generate different answers at the end of the session.
Fantastic. Denise, will I move on to the next slide? We've got no questions. Let's do that. Okay, press my little button here. So we often start with this slide when we're starting to do our, let's call it our training, our introduction to lean thinking and practice. And for me, people usually understand the concept of it being focused on the customer. If you can kind of, it's easy for them to come to that kind of understanding. But, one of the things that I think sometimes people kind of get an aha moment around is that lean thinking and practice is really a system for developing people, and that we create meaningful work, we create the conditions as leaders for meaningful work, so that people can develop in all sorts of ways. Some of those ways might be directly related to the practice of lean thinking, but actually it might be a broader kind of sense of development as a person. And so, I always think about when we stop with this slide, often at the beginning of our sessions, and think about customers and improvement, but also the people inside the system that you're engaging with. And for me, I think that's a point in time where people kind of get it, and we can often see that shift turn up in our kind of pre and post kind of training reflections. All of a sudden, the emphasis on people starts to turn up where it didn't really turn up at all at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this focus on meaningful work has become really important, sort of intra-COVID and post-COVID. And, you and I do a lot of work in healthcare. And, it was it was a pretty tough time in healthcare, whether you were in the depths of COVID or in particularly, but also, also for those of us who are more on the periphery. But I do think this, concept of meaningful work has become really, really important in terms of engaging frontline teams with any sort of desire to take the first step. And I think it changes the conversation when you talk about, I think meaningful work is different than waste-free work,
Yes,
especially
yeah, absolutely.
as a beginner.
Well, for me, I think that concept of meaningful is about how do you engage the heart, the heart and the mind. So, what brings meaning to your work? What's your why? Like, so you're applying your kind of effort each day to tasks, but for what purpose? How do you make meaning out of that means that you can keep going when it's a bit tough, or, when you're having trouble, or when you're tired, or when you're distracted, so, and I think understanding what that means for different people and trying to get an alignment between what makes meaning for them and what makes customer value, and where you can get those two things to come together, I think you can win, right? That's what the kind of secret sauce is, I think. Dylan says in the chat, we spend a lot of time doing work that feels important, but maybe isn't the right thing to start with. How do we get the organisation to stop working on the wrong things and start focusing on the work that improves flow and patient outcomes? Because Dylan's obviously from a healthcare environment. I should have brought the bottle of cognac, Dylan, I think, for my cocktails and coaching for that question. So what do you think, Denise? He says, how do you get the organisation to stop working on the wrong things and start focusing on work that improves patient outcomes? Let's say that.
Yeah, I think I've gone through sort of waves up and downs on this topic. And, I suppose in the last few years, it always comes back to, for me, like what I learned from my colleague Janelle Lucas was, how do you meet people where they are? And whether that's frontline teams or senior leadership teams. And I know that in my work as a coach, I've certainly never always been successful in meeting senior leadership teams or meeting the CEO where they are. But I think if there's not something in it for them, it's going to be hard to get started and help them, I think, peel back the layers and see what else is there as well. I don't know, what would you add to that? Dylan mightn't like that answer.
No. I think, on the face of it, what I would say is, well, how did we get where we are? Like, why are we working on the wrong things? Why is that happening? To try and understand how we might change that, potentially change the focus. I think the other thing that I've learned, from errors that I have made, and plenty of them, is that sometimes leaders will turn up and say to a team of people, this is important to the organisation, and so therefore it must be important to you. And that just kind of falls flat, just like a balloon with air going out of it, right? Mm-hmm. And then you think you've got to motivate them more and you've got to create incentives and all of those kind of things. But actually, if we could work out what motivates people and then try and connect that, what's creating the meaning for them, and then try and connect that back to the organisation's purpose, that's a better way to go. I think, Dylan, in healthcare, and that's where I spend a lot of my time, there are so many signals in the system that are pushing a hospital or a healthcare organisation to focus on different things. Look here, look here, look here, work on this, work on this, work on this. And it is really hard to get to, the vital few, I think. And even that's something else that David Plunkett shared in the session earlier about last year. He's able to get his team to kind of the first 11, which is a cricketing reference for those who are joining us from countries where cricket is like a religion. and that includes Australia during this time of the year. And this year they've gotten to 10. But to get to 10, that's still a lot, isn't it? But actually, I imagine they probably started with 30 or more. So I think there's a discipline, Dylan, to try and help senior leaders get to a manageable set, and then the discipline to hold it.
And to be connected enough, how do we help them be connected enough to the problems and the issues at the front line, the challenges, and even the passions at the front line,
Right.
to think about how does that start to factor in working on the right stuff and what the right stuff is.
Yeah. Because I think it would be, Denise, we see this a lot. It's frustrating for frontline teams because, people turn up to work wanting to do their best, and they will turn up to work wanting to do the right thing, whatever the right thing is. And, sometimes people feel disappointed because they're trying their best to do what someone else is telling them the right thing is, but actually we've got all this other crap in their way. Right. So how do we actually create the conditions for alignment and for us to focus on the vital few? And I think sometimes that's missing. We can't just say it. We can't just say, here's the top 10 or here's the top 5. Actually, how do we get the other 35 out of the way to create the time and space and kind of the clarity for the important things?
Yeah. And you should do. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay.
I put this slide in, it sort of takes us back to our roots. But I put this, I suppose, slide in from the point of view of, I think my dogs are going to go crazy here.
Okay.
It brings the word value in,
Yeah.
I'm feeling, it feels like now we're starting to talk about relentless removal of waste, but in the effort to creating and increasing value. There's no point removing waste if we're not increasing the value. So I think that conversation about value really early on, and I've learned a lot about talking about value from my colleague Alistair Lee, because sometimes we just get so connected to the waste piece, because particularly in healthcare, my colleague Terry Platchett would say we can see waste dripping off the walls. But generally that conversation about waste early on can be a little bit disengaging.
Yes. Well, it doesn't kind of set your heart on fire, really, does it? And that's really what we need to be doing. Because if we're doing something relentlessly, at some point we're going to get tired of it. Yeah. Right. So we've got to work out how to keep going. Will we talk a little bit about hearts and minds if we look at the next slide, Denise?
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah, okay. So we won't play the video now, and some of you might be aware of this video, the meals per hour video, and you're able to get it on YouTube. If you just looked up meals per hour, you'd be able to find it. But Denise and I often share this in our capability building sessions early on. And what it is it's a kind of demonstration of how lean thinking and practice was used to improve the delivery of food supplies to communities in a small US community. And every time I watch it, I see something new in it, but also something new technical, I guess, right? But actually also every time I watch it, I feel quite emotional about what's going on. And that's for me in two parts. One is there's a beautiful kind of illustration of the value, the connection between the people doing the work and the families receiving their food parcels. Like, it's just beautiful. And then there's also something that goes on about how happy the team is who's making the improvements, about the fact that they're making things better. And they feel really proud of themselves, and you can see their development. And so, when we think about lean thinking and practice, and we can share with people, here's a really practical example, but they can get a bit of both that, the value proposition or the value from a customer's perspective, the people development and the meaningful work, it all turns up in this video in a really terrific way, I think.
Yeah, I would add to that. I'm really thankful for the TSSC in the US for, first of all, doing the work, but
Yes.
secondly, for making this video available, because
Mm-hmm.
I think, in our sort of basic capability development training, that at the moment we play this, people start to see other things.
Yes,
And it
that's right.
really starts to shift their thinking, and really brings the practice piece to life as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also, I love this picture because it's got George in it, and
Yes.
George has some reservations about this, as many leaders
Semi-reluctant,
do.
George.
He's
Semi-reluctant.
absolutely semi-reluctant, but yes, I'll give it a go. I'll, give it a burl, as we'd say, and
Mm,
see what happens. And so I am really grateful, and I do think it starts to change the conversation in terms
yeah,
of the dimensions of lean thinking and practice.
yeah. I would agree. I would agree.
The next slide, I mean, everybody is familiar with 5 principles of lean, and I like this. To me, feels like the Anat and Fizz. You can't leave it out. And when you go back to these 5 principles, I probably, although pool systems are so important in healthcare, I find that new learners probably connect less with that as a concept. But
Mm,
certainly, raising these ideas of being able to, after value, being able to see end to end,
yes.
is really important for any sector. And then I think it allows you to bring up the concept of waste within a context,
Mm,
of creating
mm,
flow. Like, you don't talk about waste until you talk about flow. And so, waste is the sort of double click after the create flow. And then, for me, the seek perfection is the relentless word. It's the continuous improvement word. It's the not moving on. Like, I think in healthcare, where my exposure to healthcare projects before I started to understand lean was, 6 months on one project, move on to the next one, move on to the next one, without actually
mm.
thinking about how do we keep continuous improvement going. So I don't
Yes.
think you can skip this when you are building that initial understanding of what lean thinking includes.
Yeah, I think the other thing for me too, Denise, is the reason we're trying to build an understanding of what lean thinking and practice is about is so that people can go and use it. And so actually at the very early stage, if you're an early stage learner, actually this is not a bad set of instructions just to keep in your head, right? Do I
Follow
understand
the
what the value
recipe.
is? Yeah, that's right. Like you don't actually have to think too much about it. Do I understand what the value is? Now, how is it made end to end? We'll talk about social and technical in a minute, but this is a critical thing about bringing people together to understand the end to end. So, like, if you're not sure what else to do, if you just start with this, that's not bad, right? Like, that's actually
Totally agree.
really helpful. Let's talk about social and technical. I'll move the slide over and let you
Yeah, that could even be
lead
our
this one.
endpoint, I think.
Yes, I think so.
We've got a whole lot more, but I didn't know how long we'd talk
No.
about what. But two important coaches in my life I've had the privilege of hearing them discuss social and technical. So John Shook at the top, and Edgar Schein, who passed away a couple of years ago, at the bottom. Um, for the time I've known John, he'd always talked about the balancing the social and technical for many years. And I think most of us get the idea that it's not just a set of tools. We certainly all wouldn't be here today if we thought it was just a set of tools. But there is, this social system, and with every lean tool, I think mapping is probably as much, if not more, a social tool than it is a technical tool.
Mm-hmm.
It's about
Mm-hmm.
getting people together. It's about helping them have a conversation without, pointing at each other. They're looking at the wall together. And then, Edgar Schein, he talked about how he saw saw it as two sides of a coin. And then he started to talk about the fact, oh, maybe it's more like a sphere, because you really don't have the edges of social and technical. It's, they blend. There's a lot of grey between them, which I think we experience. But I think for me that, this double helix that they came up with together, in a conversation together, that the social and technical are intertwined. They're inextricably linked, and you can't, shift one from the other, and, the red turns blue and the blue turns red. And I think that's the beauty of lean thinking and practice. And if we miss this piece around it being a social and technical system, we're probably not going to get very far.
I think, for me, just going back to what I was saying before about one of the reasons we do this is to, for people to then be able to use it. So for me, I will often come to things and say, have I got a social thing going on, or have I got a technical thing going on? It's never one or the other, right? It's always a bit of both. But actually there are technical tactics, let's call them that, tools that we might use that might help us get into the social, or vice versa. So, some, like you say, mapping, big kind of value stream mapping, you've got both of those things going on. And lots of people would say that mapping is a tactic or a technical kind of element of lean thinking and practice. But actually we know, don't we, from experience, that there's so much social stuff that goes on in that room that actually helps to create the value for the participants. I'm going to stop sharing, Denise, so we can see each other a bit better. And also just remind people that there's a couple of minutes left to ask us a question, make a comment, share some of your experience potentially. It's nearly 3:30 on a Friday afternoon here in Melbourne, where I am, and so I'm getting a bit tired too. So if there's anything that anyone would like to help us out with, that we'd be grateful, wouldn't we, Denise?
It's unusual for us to find a point where we're going to stop talking, really, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Well, we could get going, but other people will go on to something else that's probably more interesting than this at 3:30. If you think about your kind of life as a coach, Denise, what are the couple of things that are most, front of mind for you when you're thinking about coaching lean thinking and practice?
I think the learning by doing has, it's been important from the start, but I think that less and less it's really difficult to appreciate this methodology, this way of working with a 100 slides, 50 slides, 20 slides. I think to get to touch things, get your hands dirty, work with people in a group. And I love to do that with real work, and not just sort of, simulations are there because as a replacement for real work. But if you can replace that with real problems, real work, real processes, it's far easier for people to grasp, especially if they do understand the work. How about you?
For me, I think there's two things. One is to always remember the kind of improvement happens in two halves, the understand and then the improve. There's a tendency to kind of rush into things potentially and just, slap a solution or slap an improvement on something without understanding. And I think that resonates with me because I would have a tendency to have been more like that, and still am sometimes, more like that earlier on in my career. So, as a coach, how do I think about slowing myself down? How do I think about slowing teams down long enough to really understand? And then I think related to that, helping people to build some insight into what's going on that they keep going towards action all of the time. Why does it feel so uncomfortable to slow down, to understand, to collect the data? So in a kind of coaching and coachee, it's also about how we develop insight and leadership. Anyway, we've made it to 3:30. Have you got any gin left, Denise?
I've got some gin left, but as I said, it's non-alcoholic, so I'm
Yes,
going to be.
yes,
I
exactly.
might start the alcoholic one in a moment. Have a great weekend, everybody who's listening, and
Yes, yes.
love to hear from more of you, all of you, as the sessions continue.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, everyone. See you later.